There we go. I see the recording light on. Hello, everybody. It is 12 o'clock here in Chicago, and we are very excited to have you here. I see participants are coming in every second. We're going to get started. Feel free to join us. I want to first say thank you to all of the panelists who are here. You're going to hear from each of them individually in a moment, and I'm going to give a very brief introduction before we get started, but they're here to tell you more about themselves. We're really excited to talk about this topic, which is moving from fundraising. We call this CDO, Chief Development Officer, to Chief Executive Officer, CEO. And we're here to talk about career progression, particularly for those of us out there that are have developed a career in fundraising and are interested in moving into an executive position. We have with us today all people who have done that in lots of different ways with different paths. So this is an opportunity to really hear from them and get a sense of those journeys and hopefully learn from them, and you will get your questions answered. 2 minutes or less about Evolve Giving Group. We are really happy to be hosting this webinar. It's one of the things that we have a lot of fun doing, is offering professional development to our peers in the field in a complementary way. Our firm, Evolve Giving Group, feels both new and old at the same time. We were founded in June of 2020, so we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary. But that said, most of us have been working together, some of us for over a decade, via my prior firm, Giving Tree Associates. So the work that we're doing as Evolve is really focused in a couple of different core areas. Certainly executive recruiting and talent development is one of them. And if you have questions about that at the end of the webinar, we'll give you some information about how to get in touch with us. We spend a lot of time in campaign development, in strategic planning, and in board and leadership development, board development, training, that kind of thing. So again, questions about any of those areas, we are happy to answer them. The format of today's conversation is going to be pretty informal and conversational. I want to give each panelist an opportunity to talk to you about their journey from a position in fundraising to either the CEO or the executive director role that they hold right now. I'm going to ask each panelist a couple of questions, and then at the end, you will have an opportunity to ask them questions. Please put your questions. You can either put them in the chat box or in the Q&A box. We will get to both of them. And if there are questions that you have that we are not able to answer during the session, we will get back to you. We will absolutely follow up with you, and we will also send a recording of this session afterwards, just in case you want to share it with anyone. Okay, let's get to it. The real fun is about to begin. Like I said, I'm going to introduce right now each panelist, just a couple of sentences. You can get the full bios on our website if you want to learn more about them. And then I'm going to turn it over to Marna Goldwyn, who will be our first panelist who we're going to have a conversation with. So let me introduce everybody at once, and then we'll sort of take things one by one. Marna is the CEO of The Arc, a social service nonprofit here in Chicago that provides free comprehensive services to over 4,000 individuals per year. She joined the team in December, so I think this is something like her 100th day in office. Prior to that, she led the advancement team at Bernard Zalanche Emmett Day School in the Lakeview neighborhood for 11 years. I have known Marna for many years. I was a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania when she was an undergrad. And from there, we've sort of been connected to each other's lives from then on. And so it's very fun to get to watch her take the helm at this really important Chicago institution. Janelle St. John, maybe everyone can just wave when I say their name. There's Janelle. Janelle St. John is the executive director of Growing Home, Chicago's only organic farm operating as a social enterprise organization in the Englewood neighborhood. She started that role in September 2020. You will see, you will hear this, that there are several members of this panel who have pretty recently taken on that CEO or ED role. Before taking on this role, Janelle was chief Development Officer at Growing Home. And she's held development roles at many organizations in the Chicago area, including the Howard Area Community Center, Boys and Girls Clubs, and the Annixter Center. So welcome, Janelle. Stacy Shore, who's on my right, in a box to my right, has been with Jewish Child and Family Services for the majority of her career. It's one of Chicago's largest social service agencies. She took the reins as CEO in August of 2020. And I believe, she can shake her head if I'm right, that she's the organization's first female CEO. Yes. Okay. She'll explain more later on that one. Maybe I'm half right. Before that, she served as JCFS's Chief Operating Officer, Chief Development Officer, and many other development positions in the community. Long career in all things fundraising. So it will be a lot of fun to hear from her. Rudy Anderson, hello, Rudy, is the Executive Director at the Chess Foundation at the American College of Chess Physicians. Before taking that top spot, he played almost every fundraising role possible, including the annual fund, foundation relations, Director of Development, and he joined the organization in 2014. He started, interestingly enough, his career as a middle school teacher. So kudos to Rudy for that role. And Aaron Kerr became CEO of Blessings in a Backpack in January after serving as its Chief Development Officer since 2012. She is the organization's second CEO ever. And Aaron has worked in development roles at Christopher House, Girl Scouts of Northeastern Illinois, and Northwestern Indiana. Welcome, Aaron. Marna, we are going to kick things off with you. And here's what I first want to ask you. You went from the for-profit sector to the nonprofit world. Can you tell us a little bit about your career path and why you decided to make that change?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And it's so fun to see some old friends and new friends who are here with us today. So thanks, everyone. I have had an interesting career journey. I think back to when I knew Amy at the University of Pennsylvania. And in those days, my parents were trying to talk me out of going to work at a nonprofit, even though I think I knew back then what my passion was, but they kept saying, start somewhere else and get good experience, thinking you couldn't get great experience working for social service organizations. But I started in the financial services industry, and I was in both sales and marketing roles. And so the focus of my time was in relationship management. And that to me was a terrific foundation for the work that we're all doing now, because I loved connecting with people. I loved problem solving. I was working with middle market businesses and some nonprofits, but I really just love listening and asking the questions. What are your challenges? Let's come up with a solution together. And I think that's what we all do today, is try to solve problems and garner the right resources that we need to improve different situations and improve people's lives. So I started in financial services, but I spent a lot of time in the evenings and on the weekends as a lay leader doing fundraising, building community organizations, and I just couldn't get away from where my true passion was. And so when I had the opportunity to make a career change, I decided to test it out and move into this high impact. Some of us don't like to say nonprofit too much because we really don't want to start with the negative. We're making a tremendous impact on people's lives. And so I was really excited to have the opportunity to go over to Bernard Zell Chammet Day School, starting as a director of development, and then really growing my role and my impact to become the chief advancement officer there, and doing exactly the same things as trying to strengthen the school and strengthen the community by bringing people and resources together to make a difference in the lives of children and for our community. So I spent 11 years at Bernard Zell, and then, as Amy said, I'm now on my approximately 100th day here at the ARC, and so excited to take my experience from those prior engagements to the ARC.
So we mentioned that 100-day in office thing. In this relatively short period of time, what have you learned about the transition from development or advancement to CEO? Is there anything you wish you knew in advance? and I'm going to ask you a third question all at once. Was it always sort of in your grand plan or in the back of your mind that like this will be my next step? I'll eventually be an executive director or CEO somewhere.
I think I always wanted to lead. I always wanted to bring people together to make the ultimate impact and difference. And so it wasn't, I'm not the kind of person that charts out exactly when I'm going to make the next move, but I knew that I wanted to continue to build my skill set and build my experience so that eventually I could lead an organization. And Amy, you've been a terrific mentor over the years. You've seen me debate the different moves and different roles. But I think one of the things that to me is most important is the sense of curiosity. And we use it in when we're working with donors, we use it when we're working with our organizations, but really having that innate curiosity and asking lots of questions. And especially as a new leader here, I've really used my first couple months to meet with every member of our staff, every member of our board, as many people as possible, but just to listen and probe deeper. And I think sometimes people lose their sense of curiosity when they've been in an organization for a long time. And so coming in fresh from the outside and sort of forcing everybody to ask those questions again and trying to instill that sense of curiosity, even in longtime employees, has been one of the most important things that I've taken over from my role in development here, and also patience. Change takes time. And I think those of us who have grown development programs and walked in, thinking like, ooh, are we ever going to get there? It does take time, but patience and a vision are really what's needed. I think it's okay to be feisty, but it's also takes time to build trust, to build relationships, and get everyone on the bus with you in order to start to make that change and realize that vision.
Can you talk a little bit about how your development background prepared you for this role or not? But I'm assuming it came in handy. And do you feel like every CEO needs to have at least some fundraising, advancement, development experience? Is that sort of a prereq these days?
I think it's really valuable to whether you are serving officially as the director of development, but there are a lot of unofficial ways to help an organization generate revenue and raise money and engage with donors. I think our donors are our lifeblood. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without the donor relationships and how to take care of our donors, not just asking them, but making sure that they feel really good about the investments in our organization and that they feel cared for. And so whether you're officially in the role or you're just managing a portfolio of donors or working with them, I think it's really important experience of how to bring people together and keep them invested in your mission. And so to me, it's been really important to have the fundraising experience. And I also think that my role in development, particularly at the school, I learned about so many aspects of the school just by trying to raise money or strengthen different areas through development. And so I was really able to learn an entire organization from the development perspective, but also just digging in deep with everyone across the organization, asking what the needs were, advocating for their needs, and trying to go out and solve those needs. So I think the relationship management and the desire to strengthen the organization, that's what we're doing in development every day.
What career would you get? We have some mid-career professionals as participants here today. What and who will eventually watch this Zoom recording? What advice would you give them? Someone who aspires at some point to take on that kind of a role. How do we prepare ourselves? How do we position ourselves? How do we get others to see us as a prospective CEO? Maybe when we haven't played a COO or a CFO role, how do we get thought of in that way?
I think coming forward and offering to help in areas that maybe are not in your direct role and responsibility and your job description, but stepping in and saying, how can I help? How can I come forward and make a difference? I mean, I took on programs at the school that had nothing to do with development, but it was an opportunity for me to help others, for me to learn, and then tie in where could I get, donors involved. But I think coming forward and we have to be fearless. I mean, we have to be driven in order to make a difference and use our connections. But I think, in development, people say no to us all the time. And so it's okay to ask your colleagues might say no to you too, but you got to come forward and ask and try to be helpful in ways that I didn't necessarily think I could make a difference, but bringing a different perspective to that part of the organization can be really refreshing and valuable. So building relationships across the organization, but really offering to help.
Thank you. I think that's great advice. And we will be back to you, I'm sure, with
Okay.
some questions shortly. Um, Janelle, you have worked in development, or you worked in development for 20 years before taking on that CEO role. Can you sort of briefly walk us through your professional background and the path that led you to where you are now?
So my path is a little bit like Myrna here. Graduating from University of Chicago, you had a few options, which includes law school, med school, business school. I chose none of them. I decided to do social service, and my mom said to me, "You're never going to pay back those student loans, are you?" So there she goes. And so, for me, public service just always felt natural, like it felt like that's where I belong. And development, I did not even know development existed. You kind of just think about public service as direct service. And so I just happened to fall into the fundraising field of doing special events in New York and having fun with that. And then literally learn to work with donors and really embracing something that comes naturally. I like to talk, I'm very comfortable with people. So I fell into something that naturally fit me. So at 20 years in the business, I've had the pleasure of working with different organizations. I have the pleasure of going with my whim. Whatever is floating my boat at the time, I'm about to solve that world's problem in my little 2.2 area here. So first it was youth. So I work a lot with Boys and Girls Club of Chicago. And then it was community mental health. And so I decided to go all the way to Gary, Indiana and commuted for 5 years. So, because they were closing down all the mental health centers here in Illinois. And then it was Inglewood. It wasn't really growing home. It was like, how can I use my expertise in fundraising to help organizations with good missions be sustainable? And I interviewed and met with different leaders in Inglewood and came up upon growing home. So for me, people see the direct service, but nobody thinks about the sustainability. There's a lot of good ideas out there, but if we're not thinking about tomorrow and making sure that they're here to continue to do the good work, organizations and communities feel a void. They feel cheated. Oh, they were here and then they disappeared. What happened to that? And I don't want the community to feel cheated. And I also want people to know that most of these nonprofits are formed by people with real passion. It's not their intent to disappear. It's just that they don't have the luxury to invest in chief development officers a lot of the time. But and many of them are running their own ship. So to me, it was a mission of mine to use my expertise to help.
Thank you. When we spoke, you mentioned that the senior leadership profile in a nonprofit should better reflect, maybe than it does right now, the populations that the organization serves. What did you mean by that, and why do you feel that this is important?
So when I made that statement, I was thinking about two things. Not just the population they serve, we'll talk about that, but the people who are on the ground doing the work, right? I think a lot of times you see the EDs and they've never done direct service, they've never done fundraising. So as development officers, we're constantly fighting to explain to them the importance of something, right? They just, they were previous this, and then they come in and you're like, what is this? However, on the other side, there's also where the leadership is. Prior to me coming in, Growing Home was managed by a CEO for 17 years, which was a white male. And then Danielle came in and she was here for a year. And that was the first minority face, not just as a CEO, on all the leadership fronts, like from directors onward. No one looked like the population we serve. And I'm not saying that we have to change it completely, but we have to be intentional as we recruit people for these leadership positions, whether it's the board diversity, leadership diversity. People should see themselves in the people who are in their community every day. I think that is so important. You get more buy-in. Like since I've been here, I'm invited to way more meetings. People of other nonprofits feel more open to talking more openly about what's going on. So not necessarily change the full, but be intentional about how we recruit from the community that we're serving. And it's really, I can see some changes, and you guys probably seen a lot of that too. There's a lot more women, there's a lot more minority, but there's a lot of minority women, but we want the men too. Like you really need, if you're doing a youth program, don't you think it's important that the person who's running the show look like the youth you're trying to convince so they could buy into what you're selling, right? So I think we need to be intentional about that and really put some investment and professional development among our staff to build them up to that. Succession planning should include that as you build people to leadership roles.
So along those same lines, what advice would you give to professionals of color who are, especially those in development, who are looking to advance in their careers, especially when so many of the C-suite roles in the nonprofit world right now are held by white males?
I'll just be very honest. So I have a master's. The only reason I went to go get that master's was so I could check something off the list so people don't say, this is why we're not giving it to you. I'm happy it happened to be at DePaul and it's taught me a lot and I use everything from there. But you honestly have to be very strategic. What can people say or say why I can't have it? And sometimes you have all of that and they still say no. So what I did coming here, I searched for a home and a community that I know would be open to receiving me, right? I also made some very clear demands, and be honest. Like I had nothing to lose. When you're at a certain point in your career where you have nothing to lose, where like, I want to be my authentic self. People say that all the time, but it's so hard when you need a paycheck. I came into this role thinking I've done all I can and I'm just going to be my true self and say, this is what I think you should do. And this is why I think you should hire me. And this is what you need to talk. This is what you need as an organization. They're like, and then I put through the board to a diversity training, which is also very helpful. But you just have to be bold. And I'm not saying that it's not going to be hard. I mean, even in chief development officers, I'm used to going to meetings and being the only one, especially at a certain level. Even we have to do even more recruitment within that role in development officers. For some reason, I true story, a position came up at an organization. I never listed it so far, so you guys would not know what it is. And the position came up and it just automatically, people thought I was going to get it. And I didn't get it, right? And the person said to me, well, it won't be the first or the last time that you get passed over. And so I said, the only difference between this person and me is the way we look. I have more education, more experience, and the funders love me. But one of the true honesty that my director shared with me, and he said, they felt like, even though I've been doing it, that donors wouldn't relate to a Black woman. Like, you'll be surprised. Like, I can't, I said, I've been doing this my whole life. I have communicate, but you always have to prove yourself. Like every time you come in, there's a period of proving yourself and people go, oh man, she's good. But they never come in with that expectation in the beginning. I'm just telling you the truth. You're always gonna feel like you're starting over. You're always gonna feel like, I gotta go prove myself again. Yes, you're always gonna feel like that. I'm just gonna be honest. You have to come in, prove yourself, and then everybody's like, wow. The next time you move on, it'll be the same thing. You'll want people to just see your resume, see your interview, and take you for who you are. But that's not how it usually works. And that's just the honest truth. But what I'm trying to say through my own experience, it does work. By just keep moving on. Try to think about all the excuses that they may come up with so you could throw your cards on the table and then say, and what now? Even after raising a whole lot of money, I still get, well, I don't know. We're looking. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough. when you're a woman. It's tough when you're coming in with a double whammy of being Black. But I hope through you guys listening to me, you see that there is an end to this and there is a role for you. You're just gonna have to work it and use your connections too. Like that's so important. I have a mentor that's been with me since I started this. He happens to be a white man too. So he's often when he's my reference, and he'll be more than happy to call people out. Like, why didn't you pick her? Because of what? He's, I call him my ace in the hole when he wants to make people uncomfortable. But, again, surround yourself with good people, but be actionable and strategic and intentional.
Thank you. I think that's great advice. And I know we're going to be back to you with questions very shortly. Stacy, you represent, I think, the largest nonprofit on the panel, and you spent much of your career at JCFS before you were being named CEO. What made you decide to kind of focus your path mostly in one place rather than this thing that we hear about, you got to move on to move up? You stayed the course all in one place. Is that something that you would recommend to others? Can you sort of talk about your path?
Sure, I'm happy to. And let me also resolve the mystery of when you said, was I the first female CEO? Yes. And I am the first female CEO of JCFS, but to be really honest, I'm only the second CEO of JCFS. So we had many predecessor agencies, and some of them had female CEOs many decades ago, but the size, scope, and position are different than it was then. So yes, and I don't want to miss honoring the history that came before me.
Good point.
So, to go back to your question, you make it sound so intentional, Amy, that I just decided this was what I was going to do. And as you know, you and I've had many conversations over my long career where each time I've had that path, that moment of, do I need to make a change to keep learning and growing as a professional? I've been really fortunate to be given those opportunities within my own organization. So had I had one job for the last 25 years, I wouldn't have stayed through that. But I've been really lucky that development, I was given the space to define my position very broadly. So yes, I certainly did my fair share of gift solicitation, donor development, moves management, all of that. And I also got to work with the board in different sorts of ways and think about board development and help with a capital project. And so each time I felt that I might be stagnating, I was allowed the space to grow. Otherwise, yeah, I think that I would have been looking elsewhere, and I would encourage anybody who feels like they're really stuck and not given that opportunity to grow to do that. Marna mentioned this idea of coming in new with curiosity, and I think that because my positions have changed so often, I've been able to bring that even from within the shop. It wouldn't have worked if I always approached it as I've got this, I know this. I'm happiest when I'm a little uncomfortable, sort of don't know what I'm doing, and have to learn from the people around me.
That makes a lot of sense. We're starting to get some questions in the Q&A box, so I'm going to sort of weave them into some of the questions that I'm asking. One of them is about how you find a professional mentor. So I'm just sort of wondering about how you prepare yourself for this role. I know you went back to school, you got your MBA. I think while you were playing that COO role, do you feel like that's a necessary step? Do you feel like people should be looking out for mentors? And if so, how do you find one?
Okay, so I'm going to try to attack all of those questions. So thank you. The MBA, as Janelle was speaking, I was in a very
similar spot where I just saw I was going to hit a ceiling if I didn't go back to school and have that MBA and check that box. Most of the people I supervise have master's degrees. It's just something there. I did have a choice though about what that next degree was going to be. And as I knew that I was committed to staying in the nonprofit space, thinking about, did I want to study philanthropy? Did I want an MSW, as is not uncommon for executive directors of social service agencies? Or did I want an MBA? And ultimately, I look around our field and see that those hard business skills are so necessary and not as available, right? So as we look at the shortfall of leadership that's coming as the retirements are cascading, that those hard business skills like economics, strategic planning, finance would serve me well. I also feel that the opportunity I had to work cross sector with people who came not from nonprofit, but also from every kind of walk of life and business helped me think more broadly, develop different kinds of relationships that I wouldn't have had I stayed focused in the nonprofit sector. It just challenges your thinking and helps you see what's the same and what's different. And then I also did focus in nonprofits so that I could get the extra work in governance, obviously fundraising. We already knew think about marketing in a different sort of way. So yes, it was partially to check the box, but it really did help me think. If nothing else, it gives you a really good reading list. And keeps you honest in keeping that learning and reading going. So that was one part of it. And the other part of it in terms of intentionality was the use of mentors. Again, so much of this feels like I've been in the right place at the right time, but my mentorship started outside of JCFS when I worked for the National YMCA. The woman who hired me there has been an excellent mentor. It's been almost 30 years. I still go to her as I think through my next moves. She's a sounding board that's outside of my place of business, which I think is really important. And inside JCFS, from very early on, when I was just in my 20s, I had an executive director say to me, what do you want to be? What job? Look around this agency. Where do you want to go? And let's talk about how to get there. And this agency has invested in me at every step. So from helping me find coaches outside the organization to supporting my training and leadership development, asking questions, challenging me when I'm not quite meeting what I need to be met. And again, that has been women, it's been men from up and down the leadership. And what it's taught me is that it's as much the job of the person being mentored to find a mentor, right? Find that person who's not just going to be supportive to you, but is actually going to challenge you, be really honest with you. This is not a feel-good session, it's a growth opportunity. But also that it is very much the responsibility of leaders throughout the organization to think about succession planning intentionally and to mentor those around them, right? That had I not been asked when I was in my late 20s whether someday I'd want to be executive director, I likely would not have been thinking about that ever as a path. But somebody took the time to ask me and to say it out loud, and now that's my responsibility too.
We also got this question in the Q&A box, and I feel like it is directly tied to what you were just saying. The question was, now that you're in a leadership role, what lessons have you experienced from being under leadership to lead others? I think that's what you were just talking about. Were there poor or positive leadership styles that you would repeat or not repeat again?
Sure, we have another half hour in this session, is that right? So, wow, there have been so many.
The whole webinar just on that.
Right, the whole thing just shifted. Thanks for that question.
Yeah.
So absolutely. I'm going to say what some of the lessons are I learned, and I'm not going to say whether I learned them positively or negatively and by whom. Okay, so we'll do that. So certainly transparency is really critical. Open communication. I want to be able to give the people who are in the organization direct and open line to communicate with me and their supervisors. It's something we're trying to do at JCFS right now very intentionally. And I want to make sure that that my response to people who are direct with me is welcome. It doesn't mean I have to agree. It doesn't even mean I even have to take action, but people do need to be heard and respected and know that I'm going to be as transparent as possible. Of course, in a leadership position, there are sometimes things that you know that are not ready to be shared or need to happen in a certain communication order, but I need my whole organization to know that they can trust that when it's appropriate, they will be fully engaged, and that it's not a top-down communication, that we are networked with one another, we rely on one another, we each have jobs to do and they're different, but that doesn't make one job, we try to think of it as least hierarchically and more as roles. And that's been really critical. The other thing that I learned that I try to invoke all the time is I once had somebody teach me that in order to help people grow, you should give them opportunities to do things they do 60% well, which is to say, if you're going to grow, it should be new, and you should have opportunities to make mistakes and have responsibility and try new things, but shouldn't sit so uncomfortably that it's too hard to take on. And so I keep that in the back of my mind always, as how am I helping myself take on things I do 60% well? How am I helping the whole organization grow in terms of taking on things that they do 60% well?
That's great advice. I
It's
like
really
that.
solid, yeah.
Here's my last question for now. How has your relationship with the board evolved or changed as you've moved from CDO, COO, now CEO? And when you bring on a CEO who has pretty formal fundraising experience, does the board maybe feel like they're off the hook for fundraising a little bit? Like, okay, the staff have this. We hired a fundraiser as our CEO, so that's their job. Have you found that to be true?
So the board as a CEO, certainly everybody who's working in development knows the board relationship is critical, right? You only have a certain number of paid staff, but these are your organization's ambassadors. They connect you to people, not just who want to give money, but who want to give time, who want to refer clients and staff and think as advocates on behalf of your organization. They are the ways you reach out into the world. So that was critical in my role as Chief Development Officer. I always say I'm in this work because my job is to help people, right? And that's what they do. They do too, right? They think about how do we help people, and they're all people who want to help. They want to give their time. To be honest, the role in the Chief Operating Officer position as it related to the board was less central. We've had Chief Operating Officers who had very limited relationships with our board, right? And in many ways, you want to keep your board out of your day-to-day operations, right? We always say noses in, fingers out of your business. So it was interesting to take a little bit of a step away and then a step back in. And in fact, one of the reasons that I was eager to move back into this position was because of the return to the relationship with the board. They are in no way off the hook. We all know that fundraising or any kind of resource development we're never done, right? So they don't get to say, well, now here was this discrete body of work and we're going to give it to you as the CEO and we don't have to do it. What we get to say is now we get to do more, right? So now you know that when you're out and you have somebody you want to introduce to the agency, that you can have a partner who will feel very comfortable speaking with them. You can introduce and you can talk about your passion for mission, and I'm happy to make the ask, right? This is a partnership as we think about it. And it's also really helpful as you want your board to do more fundraising, to have somebody at the helm who's not afraid of it, right? When you have a CEO who feels like it's a little bit dirty, right, to do that work. It doesn't empower your board to feel good about their skills and how easy and comfortable and happy it can be. And so I think that if anything, if I'm doing it right, we're actually energizing the board, leveraging the board, and creating more work.
Yeah, and I have to imagine that a CEO with a fundraising background really knows how to partner with the board, knows how to engage and inspire and motivate the board to be great fundraising partners. So
That's the
thank you.
hope.
That's the hope, at least.
Right.
Thank you. Rudy, I want to ask you, you spent 12 years in fundraising before moving into the ED role you hold now. And you mentioned that you really considered fundraising a calling and that you've even found it to be addictive. Can you tell us a little bit more about your path and why fundraising felt so right for you?
Yeah, no, again, thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. Fundraising for me, I think the reason I mentioned it being so addicting was as I started to come into the nonprofit world, I was still beginning in my career. And I think for a lot of folks, when they're still trying to figure out who they are in the corporate world, right? They've left college and maybe they have an idea what they want to do. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, then I thought I wanted to be in consulting. I was actually in the process of getting a job with Booz Allen Hamilton, and I needed a part-time job because DC was expensive. And so I had taken a temp job at a nonprofit, and I had just taken it just to fill the time. And what happened was I started to fall in love with it. And of course, surprisingly enough, my boss was a mentor. And as I started to understand fundraising, I also started to understand who I was. And I started to realize all the jobs before weren't necessarily careers, but they were stepping stones to help me understand a career, which is, when you're younger, sometimes you get placed in a role that you're not necessarily enjoy, but you're really good at. So you feel like you've been pigeonholed into something. You're like, well, this kind of sucks. Or you fall into something where you're really good at, you think you're really good at something, but you're not, but you really enjoy it. And so you try, and you struggle and you go, why am I not getting better at this? Why am I not growing within this organization? And that was very much me that I didn't recognize until I saw fundraising. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I really enjoy these types of conversations and relationships that I've developed. And then every time you heard that yes, right? Every time you feel like not only were they buying into the mission of the organization, you felt they were buying into you, right? Because you were emblematic of what you were trying to show why they needed to invest in what you were doing. And so to me, that was extremely addicting. And of course, right, 12 years later, I'm still doing a lot of fundraising and I enjoy every minute of it.
We have two questions that are sort of similar about sort of readying yourself for that executive director nonprofit role. One of the questions was about, if you can't really afford to pursue a master's degree, if that's not the role for you, does that change your path? Is that sort of a roadblock? What else can you do to pursue that path? And then another related question was just about other means of continuing education and professional development. Are the things people should be reading or doing or participating in if that formal, MSW, MBA, whatever it is not immediately accessible?
That's a great question, and I do not have my MBA. I have a CAE, Certified Association Executive, which is a little bit more affordable than a MBA, although I would love an MBA at some point, right? There are a lot of things you can do, and I did ask myself that exact question. I think we can kind of pair it up with that mentor opportunity, because I think that's so critical. When you have someone that's invested in you, they might be able to open up some of these other doors. Because if you always think there's just this one path, right? I will get an MBA, or I'll go to the School of Philanthropy and get this advanced degree. And you think, well, if that's the only door, then am I shut off from things? You start to realize there are so many different groups and so many other folks that might be in your position that you can gain a certain level of experience and understanding of. And I think that's really important. And so when I had a boss, right, that when I started this role, one of the first things she said to me, it almost made me cry because I had all these jobs and I had never heard this before. She said, Rudy, the one thing my job is for you is to make you better. So you either grow here or you grow somewhere else. And I was like, I really like, I never thought like you'd have a boss that would say that. Right. And so I took that information and that support. And what that did was it gave me an opportunity, right, to have a little springboard to find out, are there other organizations that do different types of fundraising? You know, so you have Association of Fundraising Professionals, Evolve Giving Group. There are so many organizations out there that are willing to invest, right, in you as a fundraiser and really as a nonprofit and a person that wants to grow in this space. And I think once you do that and you start to just put yourself out there, you're going to start falling into different types of relationships with others that are willing to support you throughout your career. And those are the types of things that are going to help grow just as much as that advanced degree might help in the future as well.
Yeah, and I will shamelessly plug a blog that I just wrote on it's called Why You Need a Mentor. And it talks about how you find one. So check out our website if you're interested in more about that. But back to Rudy. What do you think has been the most challenging aspect of assuming moving from fundraising to the chief executive seat? What's been challenging about that, and how often do you feel like your fundraising background is coming into play? Is that like every day you're thinking, oh, thank goodness I've had these experiences? How big a part of your role does that play now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So um, I think I'm going to try to answer this in two parts where, but the fundraising background is exceptional because it also helps you understand that there's no challenge you can't overcome. So that's always the great part about it, because in fundraising, there's always something that someone's going to tell you is too hard to do, and you kind of get excited to meet that challenge. And I think that's the same being in the executive director role. What's different and sometimes a bit frustrating is when you're working with the board, you realize you have a lot more levers to pull from and you have to figure out which one's the right one to use, right? Because when you're working and you just have that CDO hat on, they look at you as the CDO and they're just asking a fundraising related question. And I think some of the challenges that happen within a nonprofit are so beyond just the scope of fundraising that your job as executive director is to find that original source, right? It's not about treating the symptom, it's about really finding the heart of the problem. And I think with the executive director role, I think that's the exciting part because it presents new challenges. But then are there things from your previous life that you can rely on to help get you through that? And so I think it can be a double-edged sword at times, right? Where you can definitely trust in your fundraising experience and talents, but then at the same time, you have to think of solving these issues a little beyond the typical scope of fundraising, understanding that it could be, right, a potential staffing issue, it could be some other things working with your board to understand, right? So I'll admit right now, our struggle with our board is understanding the why. And so I have to put it in a perspective that they can understand outside of fundraising so they can better understand how they can be better fundraisers. And so it's a tricky proposition, but I think it's an exciting one, especially when you have a previous experience, but then you get new opportunities and new challenges to solve.
Thank you for that. You mentioned Smurf Capital when we talked, and I have to admit I had to go look it up. I had Googled it. I was too embarrassed at that point to admit that I didn't know what it was. So now I know what it is, but I want you to tell everybody else, what is that and how does it relate to the professional use of self? And for those of us out there thinking about that journey from fundraising professional to ED, why do we need to consider this?
Well, thank you. And it kind of goes to that other levers I was talking about. So Smurf Capital is this concept where, of course, I did not come up with it, but I had heard it myself. It's the idea that you as a person or even as an organization, right, you have social capital, you have moral capital, you have intellectual capital, you have reputational capital, and then, right, as fundraisers, we always know as a fundraising capital. And so as an executive director, being able to leverage all of your skills, knowing that you have different capital that you can put into a program, project, issue, initiative, that can better your organization or even better you in your career, I think is so critical to your overall success. And I think the fun part is figuring out which one's the right one to use. And when you realize you can invest yourself into something, and whether you're utilizing your social capital and your networking, right? Or even your intellectual capital, and where people can understand how much you've known or grown within your role, and that you have the opportunity to grow into something else, I think is so critical to your overall success, that it's not just about, well, I raised more money than the previous person. It shows that you're that well-rounded person that has so many different facets and perspectives that you've gained over the course of your career, that it's only going to help you further along.
Thank you. I think that's so helpful. And we will be back with some more questions after we speak to Erin. Erin and I met actually while she was in the development position at Blessings in a Backpack. But a funny story, maybe, that you told, Erin, was that you lasted 4 weeks in a corporate job before moving over to the nonprofit sector. What happened? And can you tell us a little bit about your career path and how you ended up as CEO at Blessings in a Backpack?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Oh, to be 22 again. Very similar to what Marna shared earlier. Whenever I graduated from college, I had a degree in finance, and 20-year-old me wanted to be an investment banker until I started to look at internships, and I was like, this is not what I want to do with my life. And I very luckily was able to get a paid internship, mind blowing, with a nonprofit in Kansas City. And I had that experience of what it felt like to be work with a high impact organization. And whenever I came back to my senior year in college and was looking for roles, it was suggested to me to go down both paths and consider both, paths forward. And I have to say, I think probably one of the reasons why I was not successful in the corporate job search and in that 4-week position was because my heart was not in it. I probably made a really bad decision on what position I picked to go corporate. But by about noon on my very first day, I was like, this doesn't feel right. This is not how I want to be spending my time. The culture, the focus of the organization, and just the end result. And it was actually a wonderful business, wonderful corporation. They did a lot of really wonderful things. It just wasn't my jam, to be quite blunt. So I think on day 2, I started to look at nonprofit positions in Chicago, and I was very lucky. My dad was at that point in time the president of his university's foundation, small school in Northwest Missouri. He'd kind of fallen into the volunteer role whenever he got into that. And he learned so much about the industry that, ironically, my dad, who had been very in favor of me becoming an investment banker, shifted. And he's like, you're a woman. This is a growing industry. There will be no glass ceiling for you like there would be in investment banking. And he got really involved in nonprofits and AFP and all sort of stuff. And ironically, he kind of helped me plot my path forward and helped me get more connected into that world. Ironically, my brother is now also a chief development officer for public television in Kansas City. My younger brother is a public defender. It kind of turned into the new family business compared to the old family business. But I think because of that and other people I ran into along the way that, have those conversations with you. Where do you see yourself going 15 years from now? What does your life look like? How do you want to be spending your time? Who do you want to be interacting with? I could kind of see where I wanted to go, and then was able to make career decisions to help plot that forward. Now, I will say, I never really envisioned this, but chief development officer was kind of where I already had my mindset on. And then you get to that position And that's when you then start thinking about, okay, where do I go next? What do I do? What am I really enjoying? What do I want to do more of? Where do I go next from here? That during my CDO position, I was able to kind of plot forward where I would go from there.
I loved when we spoke last that you talked about failure and the role that it plays in professional development. You talked about a fear of failure being a debilitating condition. So how does willingness to fail propel you forward and prepare you for whatever comes next? And because I always like to sneak in a second question for every question, what advice would you give early to mid-career professionals who are looking to escalate their progression? Like they want to push that up. What's the relationship to failure?
Yes. So very luckily, whenever I joined Blessings in a Backpack, it was the CEO that took over from the founder. It was just an amazing little gift that we were given. Here's this organization. At that point in time, we're feeding about 50,000 kids, 4 years old, $4 million budget, and it was very raw. So there was such a strong dedication to the mission from our volunteers and everything that my former CEO and I were just like, we just can't mess this up. So we kind of had this sense of failure because we knew we were going to be coming in, and I joined the organization maybe 4 months after she did. We knew we were going to be coming in and changing things. And that's hard, especially whenever we had 7 staff members at that time, and I think about 8,000 volunteers. This was this volunteers' baby just as much as it was ours. So I had Brooke and I still reflect on this from time to time. Like, remember when we used to say we just can't mess this up? The flip side of that, though, was that we wanted to make our volunteers proud of us. And it's really a customer service equation to it, where we wanted to give them the tools to succeed. And so that fear of failure kind of drove us to really focus on what were the wins that we needed. And knowing that since we're creating structure, we're creating this organization, be very blunt and say, hey guys, we're going to take some wrong steps. Guarantee you, as much as the sun is going to come up tomorrow, we're going to make some mistakes here, but our goal is to learn from it together and change things along the way. So I think acknowledging that from failure comes growth really helped us kind of seize that fear. For career development, I think this kind of goes back to what Stacy shared about be 60%. I wrote it down. 60%, they're going to do it 60% well. Pushing yourself to where you're uncomfortable about some things. Be aware that you're uncomfortable with them. Why are you uncomfortable with it? How do you put yourselves in uncomfortable positions as an opportunity to grow? Not because you like to be uncomfortable, but how do you take it and use that as a way to develop new skills, overcome something new? As Janelle mentioned, the needing to always prove yourself kind of comes into that as well. And it's prove yourself to yourself. Like, oh no, I am actually this strong. I can do this. I think that was as I was moving into from the CDO to the CEO, whenever I realized, oh wait, our CEO is going to need to retire here pretty soon, or she's not going to need to, she's going to want to. What do I do about this? And it probably took me about 6 to 12 months, because it was a long development time period, to realize, oh wait, I do want this. And I'm going to say it out loud. And I'm going to say to, my husband, my friends, my siblings, this is something I'm thinking about. What do you suggest I do? What are your thoughts on it? Because it was weird for me to actually kind of verbalize. We're so often comfortable in our roles and such like that, to always say, no, I'm going to reach for this. And I'm going to start working to put myself in the position where I can achieve it.
Along those same lines, how did you get, so there was that process of almost socializing the idea, internally to yourself, to your friends. But what about to the board? What about to those who are decision makers, where they sort of saw you maybe in this more narrowly defined role, like Erin's a fundraiser, she's not a CEO kind of thing. And I know they opened up the search externally, and you had some competition for this position. How did you position yourself as the right one, the right choice, and sort of confidently do that and bring the board to that spot where they saw you that way?
That is a great question. And I think for me, it was extremely helpful to have a mentor as part of that, because we were able to sit down and talk about who needs to be on your side. Who needs to be on your side, not during the decision-making process, but then whenever you move into the role. And I have to say, so I started January 1st, my first 4 months, having the support of the Blessings in the Backpack team members. It was one of those things where somebody said to me, well, you need to connect with those people that you don't normally work with within the organization, so they feel comfortable with you if you move into that role. That has been extremely critical. Just, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. We had our biggest 2-week fundraising week of all time whenever we went viral with the Buffalo Bills in January. If I had not made those connections with different team members along the way and had them felt like they could trust me even before I moved into the CEO position, oh my goodness, that was just so critical. So it's not just making the connections with the board members who then make the decision to hire you into this position, but it's the other people who are critical volunteers outside of the board, who are some of your donors that you need to be like, oh no, I met with them with my CEO for the last 2 years. And then staff as well. So really kind of have somebody where you can bounce ideas off of, that mentor position, to then also identify some of the gaps that you might have. And I was lucky, it was 2 or 3 years, you could see it coming. I could make my resume more robust. And by making my resume, also making my experiences. So what volunteer roles do I need to take within the community to get experiences that I'm not going to get at work? Where can I get, the free professional development as an addition to paid? Similar to Rudy, I don't have my MBA. So what books do you read? What classes do you go to? What blogs do you follow? So kind of thinking about it really in a wide view, and having somebody to help you form that view was really helpful for me.
And maybe what we'll do afterwards, because we have a couple questions from people in the Q&A box, like, what should I read? What blog should I follow? So maybe we'll, as part of our follow-up to people, is we might get like 1 or 2 recommendations from each of you, and then we can share it out. Because I think people wonder what you're reading and what you recommend they read. Thank you, Erin. I think see, Janelle's holding one up. Do that again, Janelle. Leading with values. I love it. Erin, I'm gonna start us in the Q&A area, and I'm gonna give you a first question here. This question says, for our organization, the consideration of a DoD or a fundraiser would be a big mental or cultural shift for us. They're more likely to spend money or choose a program person. What suggestions do you have for helping to educate or support the board and leadership to understand the importance of experience in leadership, management, and fundraising being key versus choosing only to invest in program?
Ooh. That question.
That's a loaded question, but it's a good one.
That's a big one. That is that organizational shift there. I assume that, I think part of it is tied into how you present fundraising results to the board. How it's tied back, and this is probably very limited to my organizations I've been a part of in our board meetings, but how the fundraising ties back to the organization, and how you show your organization knowledge and your leadership knowledge to the board during your fundraising presentation, your fund development presentation, whatever that might look like. That is a really big change and I actually might not be the best person to respond to, because all of my CEOs, executive directors that I've ever worked for actually were all fundraisers before they moved into the CEO ED position. Now that I'm thinking through everybody. So I was luckily through my career working with a board that valued fundraisers
Prioritize that.
for leaders.
Did anyone else want to take a shot at that question, helping your board to value and invest in fundraising versus like every dollar really should go directly to program?
So when I first came into development, I came in actually as the coordinator of volunteer. We were volunteers. We were a social service agency without a development department. So I got to watch this shift over the decades. There was no value in fundraising when I entered. We had government contracts, some loyal funders, a partnership with Jewish United Fund, and that was it, right? So one of the things we had to do was create a sense of urgency on the board and help them understand why it was important, right? So the more you use your board meetings to talk about how well things are going and have a balanced budget and help them feel comfortable, the less they're going to value fundraising, right? It's not something that they really know, nor do they feel confident in their ability to do it or your understanding of how it connects to the broader agency. I think the other thing that you could do is be a partner to program. It's like the old in for-profit, that idea of like sales and development don't really know what one another is doing, and that's really fundraising and program. And so the more you're actually partners and there and show that you understand the importance of program, but equally help educate the board on, those articles that are tried and true, but still apply, like the nonprofit starvation cycle, right? Are we keeping ourselves from growing because we're only willing to invest in the services? Well, if you want to keep investing in services, you better be investing in development and the skills of the development staff, right? Or you're going to stagnate. So the more education you can do with your board, both on the importance of fundraising, but what I'm hearing in that question is also, how do I move from fundraising to broader leadership? That's going to be you making sure that you're also applying your fundraising to broader leadership.
And Amy, I want to add one more to that. I think not just the program, but redefining the word nonprofit is what I would say. Most of them are business people. So I appeal to me, development is a sales job. The only difference is we're selling a mission versus a product. And literally using the same terms they use in their industry, in our industry. Of course, they say shareholders, we say stakeholders, but literally trying to change the way people think of nonprofit, and to see it's not a nice to, it's a need to. And then sustainability is so important. So literally changing the way how I talk about what we do. I hope we get rid of that nonprofit kind of word, because people sort of assume that means it's a zero something, not about sustainability. That helps. And most of your board members are business people, looking at what businesses they're in and start shifting your narrative to match your audience, which is them.
Thank you.
I would just also add, sometimes boards can't envision what is possible. Like, they know how revenue has been generated up till now, and sometimes we get somewhat insular and not realizing what we have the potential to do as an organization. And so I think introducing some model organizations that have changed their development program, brought in the kind of development leadership and what is possible, really painting a picture with either peer organizations or others. But I think sometimes boards don't realize what we have the capacity to do with the right teams in place.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Rudy.
Yeah. Well, we're right in the midst of exactly that. We've had a different shift for the foundation staff. In fact, right, talking to the board about all the foundation staff is just dedicated to fundraising, because we have a parent organization that has program work. They see the relationship to what Stacy's talking about. That's super important. But also as a foundation board, it's that concept of, you always hear mission versus margin, and I get so annoyed, because it's not mission versus margin, right? These are not mutually exclusive terms, right? The only way to build upon your mission is to have an effective margin, right? And the only way to gain a margin is to have a really great mission, because we are salespeople and we're really talking about selling the belief in something rather than a particular product. So we are definitely having that same conversation. I think one of the things that's helping us do that is not only the idea of a fundraising curriculum for them, especially because our board is made up of doctors. So not even just business people, but doctors who are very analytical and black and white, trying to understand fundraising. We're actually working with them to understand, starting with why. So can they understand what kind of business are we truly in? Why is it important? Rather than just saying, well, it's important because we do good work, right? And getting them beyond those particular statements, I think is it's a difficult one, but I think it's a one very worthwhile, because obviously a strong board is really going to tell you how far you can go.
Agreed. Marna, we have a question about the value of coaching, and I'm picking on you. You know why? Because we've had a coaching relationship, and I know you've used other coaches and external professional resources throughout your career. So this person's just wondering about whether or not it's helpful. Do all CEOs or EDs need external coaching or an opportunity to be able to vet issues and challenges outside of the organization?
I'm a huge proponent for coaching. I think that having someone to not only help you, but also challenge you, and to grow as a leader at whatever level you're at in your organization, but someone who's not part of your day-to-day life. So they're not judging you, they're not watching you, but they're bringing some outside perspective, but actually here to make you stronger, because you're in this relationship where they care about you. So I think having a coach, and sometimes I've had coaches in my area of expertise or function, or for a specific development purpose, but I've also had coaches just in a leadership capacity who didn't really understand my business necessarily, and were able to bring a different perspective to my leadership, and both have been particularly valuable, and they don't always have to be paid for. I think there are people who can coach you or mentor you, and I found consultants that my organization, where I had a marketing consultant once who became that coach or mentor to me. So I think it's finding the people who care enough about you and want to see your growth, and who are willing to take the time to invest in you, but also ask you the difficult questions that you might not always ask yourself.
Thank you. That's helpful. I think this is going to be our last question. And I think probably 4 out of the 5 of you could answer this, but one of the participants said that, Erin, you mentioned that you competed for an internal role at your organization, and she wondered, what would you have done if you didn't get the job? Is it hard to go back to the role you had? I mean, right, Stacy, you were CEO. Like, what if you had not been chosen? I'm curious to hear from those of you who went for a role internally. Is it hard to go back to your original seat if you don't get that job? Erin, I'm going to start with you, just because the question was directed at you, but what would you have done?
That is such a good question. And it's kind of one that I changed my position on as I went along. At first it was like, oh, if I don't get it, fine, I'll keep on plugging along. Not a problem. I love the organization, so dedicated to the mission, love the people. But then as you put yourself out there a little bit more, and you can start to feel, this is what I would do. And, I actually put together a 4-page document on my vision for the future for the organization. And once you kind of put it on paper, and all of a sudden you're like, ooh, this is going to sting if I don't get it. Then you also don't know who's going to come into the position instead, and how, especially in the fundraising role, how you're going to work with them. So my take on it was that I give it 6 months. It wasn't something where I was going to just, especially for my team and the organization as well. Because, if you have a CEO transition and a CDO transition out of the organization at the same time, I couldn't stomach that for what it could mean for the organization and the team as well. So I'm like, I'll give it 6 months. We'll see how it goes. I think it would have been a very challenging 6 months at times, maybe. You never know whoever came into the position. But that was kind of my stance on it. And that was something I had to think through. You really, both in
Yeah.
deciding if you're going to try it, if you're going to make the play for it. But then as you get into it, like, okay, what's my other path forward? If I'm not doing this, what's my next path forward?
Yeah. Stacy, I think you had been in the COO role maybe only a year when this opportunity came up. So what would have happened? Would you have continued to play that role?
Yeah, you're right. I was in it for about 10 minutes when our CEO announced that he was retiring a little earlier than I would have hoped. And so I had to go into this, and first of all, with full confidence that the search committee was going to make a choice that was going to be best for the organization. That wasn't necessarily about me, but had to be about what they saw. I cared enough about the organization that I absolutely would have stayed through transition. In fact, had an agreement that I would be staying for a couple of years past that transition with the board. That said, working with my coach, I got some pretty strong advice that I had to make it clear to the search committee that that was true, but I also needed to make it clear to them that they don't get a twofer. That as I was interviewing for this job, I would be staying through the transition, and I wanted really, truly to be CEO of this organization. But to make no mistake, my goal was to become a CEO, and I would do what I needed to learn here, and then I would be looking. And I think that that's something we sometimes, specifically those of us in caring professions, that it can be hard to remember to say, I absolutely care about this place, that I am committed. And there's a limit to that, after which I will move on. So that would have ideally been my path. I would have stayed for a couple more years, and then looked for a CEO position, most likely at a similar organization, but I'm an empty nester. I was free to go move about the country. So that was my communication with them.
Yeah, Rudy, last comment, then we're going to wrap up.
Yeah, only because I went through that and didn't have the exact same experience, because we actually shut down the search amid, it was between me and a final person. And we had to close the search down because the search committee could not agree on what they wanted.
Oh,
so
wow.
So I was in limbo, almost for like 6 months, to where I had to have a different kind of conversation with, luckily I had a lot of trust and faith in my CEO from a larger organization, and we talked through what was going to be expected of that. So I went through that same process. I'll be honest, I would not have stayed, even though I love doing what I do. I don't know if I could, because I did the exact same thing Erin did. I put my vision out there, and it was the first time I'd put it on paper in a couple of years. And I was like, oh my goodness, here's my baby, and I want to grow this baby. And so lucky for me, right? I think the board and eventually the committee saw what I was capable of bringing to the organization, and we made that decision. But yeah, talk about, not making an immediate decision and having to shut down the search and just say, we're going to suspend this for a little bit and see how we go into this weird, you're the associate executive director and we still just have a CEO. So it was a vacant seat for a while. Yeah, that was an interesting time.
That's tough. Thank you, Rudy. And thank you all. I just want to say I'm enormously appreciative of your time, to all of you on the panel who do this out of your goodwill. Thank you for being part of this. I want to remind everyone who has participated today that we will be sending out a recording so that you can share it with friends and colleagues, some suggested reading materials, and a link to sign up with someone on our search team. So if you're here because you're thinking about career growth and you want to talk it through with someone, we're happy to do that. We're really anxious to meet you and learn more about you. So again, thank you for participating. Keep an eye out for our next webinar, and a round of applause to our wonderful panelists. I will let you get back to running your organizations. Thank you.
Thank you.